Okay, we're recording. It's October 15th, 2016. We're in New Braunfels with a lot of cicadas. And the last time we talked, it was about Mom and Dad living in Wisconsin, Dad working on his PhD, and Mom working on her Master's in Library Science. Well, I think Dad was telling about his Spanish studies, and then we'll go from there. Anything you want to talk about before we move on from Madison?
Actually, it was in Madison about 1973, I would guess, or 4, where I met one of the guys that was going fishing in Canada. And that started my friendship with Jim Maluda and Stan Schmidt and the Canadian fishing trips where we'd fly in and stuff. I think we mentioned this because, you know, that was where Fritzel said it was horrible and I loved it. Anyway, it was turned out to be sort of an important part of our lives over the next 2 or 3 decades. And Jason Bradford went with us, and later at the very tail end, Ruthie went 1 year, and we'd fly back into an outpost camp. Anyway.
Well, tell me about the first trip, just to get an idea.
Well, the guy said, actually I met Ken Frenchel at a firing range in Madison, trying to shoot something, and he was saying about how the black bear were tearing up their camp. And I said, well, what you need is a bear hunter. And he said, are you a bear hunter? I said, well, I'm more a bear hunter than a fisherman. So the first year I went, you know, we drove up there, drove all night long.
With the boats.
We're pulling 2 boats, and it wasn't like in the latter years where we had that good road across the national forest. It was a long drive. You drive all night. We got up there, we parked, we, you know, set it up with camp to fly the beer and the gear back in, then we get in the boats and go up through the chain of lakes and Loch Sewell back to this little island. And the only thing is I found out real quickly that sitting over a pile of fish guts with a rifle waiting for a bear to come by with 1,000 mosquitoes around you wasn't near as much fun as actually catching walleyes in northern. So the gun went into a case, and after that the fishing became the once-a-year big-time fishing trip. It was great. It made some good friends, and over the years various guys come and go, but basically Schmidt and Jimmy and I were sort of the 3 that stuck with it for the whole time.
Anything you want to talk about Madison before we move on from there?
I don't think I mentioned Jennifer and I had a great trip to Montana. My sister Catherine was teaching in Helena, and Jennifer and I we must not have had much money, but we took the train, which we caught in Columbus, Wisconsin, and took the train out to, I believe, Bozeman, although I'm not sure, where we met Aunt Ding, and then we had a camping trip coming back. So we stayed with her a few days in Helena, then we went to Yellowstone, and this was the middle of June, and we had a huge snowstorm, a heavy, late summer snowstorm that broke 2 of our tent poles, and the tent came crashing in on us. So we broke camp, we drove to Casper, Wyoming, where we got the tent poles fixed, and then we went to Mount Rushmore.
Really?
Yes. Did some camping there, and camped all the way home. But that was a fun trip. We had a good trip. And your father being in the military, the idol of the PhD and the Master's and being close to the family ended. And we were sure we would go to Fort Sam, Houston.
Absolutely sure. I had a PhD, in the whole Army Medical Department, there's only 2 PhD slots. One at Fort Sam Houston in charge of all of the training programs, and the senior consultant to the Army Surgeon General. Only 2 slots. So I was going to Fort Sam.
But we got orders to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And your father, in his usual straightforward way, tried to tell me that it was in New England. I knew Fort Dix was in New Jersey.
New England, New Jersey, you know, East Coast, Garden State.
But it was a surprise. But we handled it quite well. I can't remember if we just farmed the kids out to the various relatives, but over spring break, or Easter, we flew to Philadelphia, checked in at the post because we knew nothing about Fort Dix, and found out there was very little housing on post. And it was the sort of thing you would have to wait a year or 18 months to get housing. So we decided, we bought the house in Madison, we decided we would buy a house. And went through 2 or 3 realtors.
One wouldn't even talk to us.
Yeah, that's right.
We
Because we
You gave him a price range? And
Yeah. Price range, said nope, nothing in that range.
And we looked around for a whole day with the second realtor. Really, what he showed us in our price range was absolutely horrible. We couldn't have lived there. There wasn't anything that we would have considered buying. And at the end of the day, he turned around and he looked at us and he said, well, what are you guys going to do? And it was like, well, what are we going to do? But the next thing we decided was we would look for a house to rent. So we just went in Moorestown on the street into a real estate agency and found this young Italian.
Looked like he was out of The Sopranos, sort of, sort of a silk shirt,
long, dark hair.
Talk with that accent.
Fast-talking Eastern guy.
Just what we needed.
And we said we'd been looking for a house to buy, but we couldn't find anything. And that agency had a house for rent that we had seen in the newspaper someplace before the internet. And we'd driven by it, and it was 1 block from downtown Moorestown, but it looked like a decent house. It had hardly no yard, but it looked like a nice house. So we went in and we said we want to look at that rental house. And he talked to us for a minute. And he said, oh, you guys don't want to rent. You want to buy. And I have the house for you. It hadn't even come on the market yet. They had talked to the owner and they were going to list it, but I don't think they'd even signed the papers. And he said, this house is in your price range. It's perfect. We were looking for 4 bedrooms, but we didn't even come close to 4 bedrooms. It was 3 bedrooms and a bath and a half, I think.
Double lot.
But it had a double lot and a garage, and it was in a very nice neighborhood. Do you remember
I
that
do,
house? Yeah. A small...
Big houses around us
50,
with wealthy kids.
Yes, and we had
doctors and lawyers.
On our street, there were 3 or 4 of these small, sort of 60 ranch-style, 3-bedroom brick, kind of New Jersey houses, but a nice yard and nice neighbors, close to a park, close to Strawbridge Lake.
Moorestown was sort of a New England town.
It was, a Quaker town.
Very Quaker, good schools.
And it had a history, way back to the Civil War.
Revolutionary War.
I misspoke. So it was a great place. The schools were good. Chris went into middle school. Jenny was, I think, in 2nd grade. You went to kindergarten there and 1st grade. So
we're our neighbors who had all the boys and girls. They had a giant family.
That was the Rogers.
And they were so nice.
They were a wonderful family. He worked for RCA, I believe, in Philadelphia. They had an older daughter who was at Rutgers. then 2 or 3 boys who were in high school, and then a couple of girls who were, and the youngest one was like Chris's age. But those kids, the boys were very good to you. They played, remember they played lacrosse?
They played lacrosse and they had dirt bikes or scooters or something.
Or something, yeah. But we had a great, it worked out great. We bought the house, flew back. I guess that you drove our car out. Did we all drive? I can't remember. Anyway, you finished up the PhD. I finished up the master's degree. We piled you kids, we just had one car, piled you kids in the car and headed out. It could have been a disastrous tour, I think.
Well, you know what I sort of only half jokingly say is Ruthie cried when we got the orders and she cried when we left. Because, you know, we met Jerry Torba, who was a nice administrative MSc officer, got good friends with him and his wife. We would go to the big shopping in English Town, which was a huge market area. We were close to Philadelphia during the bicentennial. We would go into Governor's Island, which was a Coast Guard station off the Manhattan, where you could go to the guest house for just not very much money at all, ride the ferry back from Manhattan.
And the best view of the skyline
Beautiful
anywhere.
view. And
Yeah.
turn the kids loose. I mean, where else in proper New York could you say, oh, the kids are going to go out and play? And professionally, I was chief of pharmacy in a 300-bed Army hospital. I'd done it before. Got along good. The kids will laugh at this. I published one of the first articles on computerization in military pharmacy at that time. Had an IBM 32 computer, which was about the size of 3 Foot Lockers or a refrigerator, which probably couldn't do as much as your iPhones do now, but turned out to be a great assignment.
And we did a lot of traveling. We went into Philadelphia often. We went into New York City. We made a trip to Washington, D.C. We visited, and everybody came to visit us. The Libbies, the elder Libbies came to visit us. And we took Grandpa Libby and Grandma Libby on a grand tour of Civil War battlefields.
Down through the Shenandoah Valley.
And his dad was born in Spotsylvania Courthouse, Virginia. Isn't that right?
Yep.
And he always thought it meant a courthouse, but I think it was a town. And I will never forget, we went into the courthouse, and Grandpa Libby said, now, do you have records going back to the Civil War? And the woman looked at him and said, sir, we have records going back to 1700s or something.
And we found it.
We found where his grandfather had bought land, the land that I think Stonewall Jackson had been killed on.
Really?
He was a carpetbagger after the Civil War.
Right, so he bought timbered land, set up a logging mill, and logged a lot of the land.
And I think he did very well and liked it. But his wife, I don't think they were ever accepted by the community. And I can't remember how long they were there, but she told her husband, you can stay here, but I am taking the boys, and we are going back to Wisconsin.
That was Grandpa Libby's grandfather?
Pete was born there, so it
was his grandfather, and his dad was born there.
Okay.
So they moved, I guess then the whole family moved back to Wisconsin. But we saw a lot, and we went to Western Maryland, Civil War battlefields. We went to Gettysburg. Yeah, we went up to West Point. Anyway.
I remember the first time I had lobster was in New York City at a Chinese restaurant. Yep. Was that over New Year's or something? Or
I remember that trip, but I don't remember what it was for. I started to say, we had every relative we had came to visit us. My parents came twice. Your parents probably came twice. Neil's brother came. Bonnie and Beth came to visit us. Barb and Bob brought the kids. Catherine came a couple of times. And we took them all on the rounds. We'd go into Philadelphia and go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and we'd see the Ben Franklin Museum, the Liberty Bell, the old State House. We would go to New York, stay at Governor's Island, go to the Metropolitan, Central Park, the Brooklyn Museum, and you especially we went on so many guided tours that little Jason would be standing there, and the docent would hold up something, and she would say, "Does anyone know what this is?" And Jason would say, "Yes, it's a mousetrap."
Or, why is the bed only 5'5"? Because people were shorter back then.
After you've seen it a few times, you get to know the answer.
Yeah, so it was a great 2 years. I got a part-time job because
We got some sirens in the neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah, something's happening.
Yeah, Teddy's throwing eggs at vehicles again.
Uh-oh. I did not look for a full-time library job just because we were in the suburbs. Your dad was commuting. I got a part-time job teaching the high school GED at Fort Dix, teaching in the morning. You were in kindergarten. It just worked out well.
I moonlighted some in a retail pharmacy there in Jersey, too.
In Cherry Hill.
Yep.
I forgot that.
I did.
Yes, you did.
We had friends who were the Beskins, or at least the kids did.
Yes. And you had a good friend, Barrett Seaton, whose dad was an assistant district attorney in Philadelphia. He would take 4 or 5 boys to the Phillies games. I don't know if you remember going to the baseball.
I remember seeing Pete Rose play.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I also remember for the first time actually having friends who were Jewish.
Yes.
And it was a pretty vibrant Jewish community.
And it was a learning experience because I had Jewish friends, in various places, but very observant Jews. So I can remember Jenny having, I had his name, but I forgot it, but she had a friend over who happened to be a boy, and I was fixing them lunch, but I didn't have kosher meat. And he said, "That's all right, Mrs. Libby, I can have peanut butter." So it was kind of a learning experience, and the food was different. I mean, the Jewish food and stuff was a fun time.
Dr. Beskin was a dentist, and he would have some patients who were soprano-type folks. They'd make the appointment, a big car would come up, there'd be a chap waiting in the waiting room with them, and they would always pay cash immediately after the dental appointment, which was...
I remember finding a long sock with a cue ball in it, which was a weapon.
Yeah, long.
It was New Jersey, but it was a nice neighborhood.
Yeah,
yes.
A nice town, and we found Philadelphia to be a wonderful town, New York. It was a great assignment. And then we finally got our orders to Fort St.
After 2 years.
After 2 years.
Only 2 years.
Only 2 years.
Yeah. And then I wasn't ready to leave because we were having such a good time. By that time, I think we had 2 cars and we had guinea pigs. So we loaded up. I don't think we could have gotten everything in one car.
That's a long drive to Texas.
But we stopped in Washington, D.C. and saw how we got the guinea pigs into the hotel. I do not recall that at all, but we did. And traveled to Texas. We had come down to San Antonio and bought a house. We did the same thing. We flew in, I don't know, in April or May.
Bought the Winter Haven house.
Bought the Winter Haven house, and then drove in. closed. We had to spend a few days at the officers' club. Do you remember that? They had transient officers housing there. Moved in and
Windcrest
adjusted.
was nice.
Yes, at the time, it was a great place. You could, remember you'd walk the dog to the vets?
They had the vet. I remember that, but I remember there being a pond and a park, half a mile away, walking distance to the elementary school. It was a long walk, but within a bike ride or a long walk to the swimming pool for
Right.
summer times. Hills and fields to play in on the edge of town.
Right, it was, and
John Verhage just around the corner.
Lots of kids.
And it was a big, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths.
That was
house.
2,700 feet or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was perfect at the
Big
time.
And
backyard.
Roosevelt High School, I think, was a multicultural, large school, which was, I think, a pretty good learning experience as far as what our culture is really all about. Wasn't, you guys got through it. You made some good friends and played some football. And
When you got there, your assignment was teaching at the academy?
it was one of the positions. It was head of the pharmacy branch of the Medical Service Corps School, MFSS, at Fort Sam, and we trained all of the 91Q pharmacy technicians, and at that time it was a 16-week course. We had all of the other pharmacy and pharmacology instruction from, medications that a helicopter pilot should have in his first aid kit to the pharmacology training and the nurse anesthetist training program. Courses in the 91 Charlie, which is an LVN training program. So it was all of the academic pharmacy and pharmacology for the military medical training.
But I remember you leaving early and coming home early because you did PT in the morning.
Yep, at that time it was my weight was down, got into running with the troops, doing physical training every morning with them.
What time would you show up?
Oh, probably get there at 5:30, 5:45.
It was early.
And, we'd do the calisthenics and run a mile or 2 miles. Sometimes we'd cut the calisthenics and run for 3 miles. And then the guys would be rushed in for a shower and probably a 2,000-calorie breakfast, and then we'd move them into a classroom at, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. I would say academically, philosophically, the assignment was not as... I couldn't make as many changes as I really wanted because basically the 60% of the staff was involved in the 91Q pharmacy training program, where we trained pharmacy techs that worked in all of the military Army hospitals. And that particular curricula had been set up by pharmacists, so it was a mini pharmacy school. And in fact, it should have been a vocational technical training program because the kids would be graduated and they might know something about, congestive heart failure or treating with digoxin, but helping fill prescriptions or work in a pharmacy, or so they'd be turned out into these Army pharmacies with not a lot of practical skills. So there weren't very many educators there. The doctors thought like doctors, nurses like nurses, pharmacists like pharmacists, and I'd just come out of an aggressive PhD program focusing on the various levels of education training that were appropriate, from a continuing ed for professionals through the VOTEC stuff. So we made some changes. We expanded the labs significantly and had a very autocratic leader of the Medical Surgical Division, a physician, who I wouldn't say clashed with a little bit, but we had some discussions about what was appropriate in training. But it was 4 years.
Who was the boss who had all of the property at Hallettsville?
Oh, he was the assistant chief of Med and Surg Division, a nice man.
Colonel.
Oh, that's horrible. I'll think of it.
And he was the assistant boss, and I treated him, with a lot of respect, and,
He would have been much easier to work for.
He would have been much easier to work for than senior.
But they had the place out in the East Texas on the way to Houston.
And
We
it
used
was
to-
past Hallettsville, and what was the river? It starts with an N.
Nacogdoches?
Navistad or something.
Navidad, yeah.
And it was wild. And we'd go over there.
We go goose hunting out there too.
Yeah.
That was a separate deal, but there was the Hallettsville place with the woods and the snakes. I shot my first deer in Hallettsville, but Jenny and Chris would go out. One time you sprained your ankle.
He had
Broken your
his
arm.
playing football with the pharmacy team.
Dumb.
And I must have had to work or something, because I didn't go with you that weekend, and you were out hiking on the property, and you did sprain your ankle. And tell them the rest of the story.
I think when your arm is in a cast, that your balance is off. And the broken arm came from, I had 11 officers at the school, which was a lot of pharmacy officers, and had probably 30 enlisted men. So I come up with really a bad idea that the officers would have a game of flag football against the NCOs. And I managed to break my arm on the second play. So the old man was out of it. Actually, we beat him because the kid that was a quarterback was about a third or fourth string quarterback for one of the southern schools, Alabama or somebody. He could throw the damn ball.
For the officers?
Yeah, he could throw the ball 60 yards, and I had a couple of guys that could catch it. So we beat him. But
Chris was not driving yet, and we had the gold VW camper. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember
but
that.
It was definitely a shift car.
Stick shift.
And your dad couldn't
push in the clutch.
So
she'd sit right next to me, and I'd say, push in the clutch, and I'd put it in second. And we'd go, I say, push in the clutch, and I'd put it third,
And I remember this about that trip, is that we were coming home and it was at night, and there was a possum in the middle of the road. It was like Dad driving with one hand and one leg. Basically, it was like, sorry, possum.
Come on, Mr. Possum. And we had the doc up the street. What was the boy's name?
Dr.
Rosenberg and Bernard.
Bernard was along.
And he said, it's just infested with animals.
He was from Brooklyn, Dr. Rosenberg.
And you guys did find a snake. It was just a bull snake, but it was probably as big around as my arm and 4 or 5 feet long.
Me, John Verhage, and Bernard found that snake, I think.
And it isn't hill country. It is half Louisiana swamp, half East Texas pine forest.
Do you remember when Jenny caught the big bass?
Oh.
We were fishing with catfish bait. And she caught a bass that was probably 25 inches on catfish bait.
I forgot that.
And I made her turn it loose because we weren't going to cook it, and she cried.
Yeah, that part I do remember.
But the bass lived, so
Right.
It was good.
it was a good trip.
And
then
I got a job in Bernie.
That's
my
right.
first library job, which was perfect, but it was about a 35-minute drive.
If you were speeding.
if I was moving right along. That was long before the traffic was so bad on 10. But it worked out all right because I didn't actually have to be there until 9.
And you were the boss.
And I was the boss. So
Head
I would work till
librarian.
5:30. So your dad made dinner for years.
And shopped in the commissary.
And shopped in the commissary.
One of the kids was asking me the other day about the meals. And I said we had venison chili a lot. And what were the other meals? What were the go-to meals when Mom was working? Because you did the cooking
Well,
then.
what I would do sometimes is there'd be 2 or 3 leftovers of spaghetti sauce and macaroni and cheese, and I would tend to say, mix it all together and say, well, this is sort of a potpourri of a buffet. I'm sure you guys will love it.
I remember chili,
I had several,
pasta,
and casseroles.
casserole.
I had several casseroles that I would make ahead. And
Texas hash.
Texas hash.
The
Good
cornbread
The
on top.
cornbread on
Good.
top.
I still love it. Haven't had it in years. Great recipe.
There's one with noodles and like mushrooms.
Yeah.
In it, yeah.
We made it work.
Right. And we'd get pizza and stuff like that. Probably more than we should have. But your dad did a lot of the cooking and shopping. That's
And you
right.
had a friend, a woman, who had a husband who had the deer lease in Bernie.
She worked for me, Kathy Gabriel.
Kathy Gabriel.
And Dan Gabriel had the lease with Tumpy Wellborn.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the Gilead Ranch.
5
And
times.
Ms. Gilead was a good library user. And they were looking, it was a fairly big ranch, and they had 2 groups of hunters, didn't they, Neil? There was Dan Gabriel and his friends from CPS. And then they had another group, and Dan asked if, because Neil was looking for a lease, and Kathy knew that you'd hunted with the Lackland Gun Club
Most
over by
Galloway.
by Lakey. I don't know if you remember
I
that.
do remember
you
that.
went, I know. But anyway,
Bob and
Kathy,
I.
and Dalloway was on it too,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of other
Army
Army guys you worked with.
that came and went, but Bob and I had it for 3 or 4 years, I think.
At least.
Oh,
Yeah.
we had it for a lot longer than
Yeah,
that.
we did. We had it a lot longer.
You had it all the way up until you had the lease in Center Point.
Right.
Yeah.
So I would have been like 12 through college.
Yep.
Because when I was 12 or 13 through college, because I remember,
You
getting
remember-
out of school, finishing classes, and driving up to the deer lease.
And all kinds of hunting stories. That big Axis buck that you shot, and you shot it once, and it went a little ways, and you shot it again, and it disappeared, and we hunted and we found it. That was a beautiful deer. Nice trophy. Nice trophy.
A lot of good times out there.
And you remember we'd go up there and have picnics in the summertime on the other side, the ranch that was on the other side of the road that was on Cibolo Creek.
Well, the Bernie Lake, and who cut the ribbon at Bernie Lake?
Yeah, that's true.
You cut you were
My
the,
boss, Edgar Schwartz, was a great city manager, and he was an amazing library supporter. So that
the
worked
Bernie
out
Lake
well.
was the water source for the town of Bernie at the time,
Yes.
and they built the dam, and you did the opening
The
ceremonies.
ceremonies, yes. And he was quite progressive because I think they had well water, but they wanted another source of water other than the well water. So,
I can remember sitting around the deer lease with Galloway and you got your first 364 Model 70, 270. Before that, there was a little Remington 600 6mm, and Galloway and I changed the bolt handle on it. I'm sure you still have
Oh, I
it.
remember. That's the gun that Teddy's going to shoot.
Yeah,
We redid the stock.
yep. Shortened it, lengthened it, had a good time. I can remember we had that horrible little cabin that, was just better in a tent, but no heat in it, no electricity in it.
And an animal in the attic.
Yep, that we named him. Fritz or Freddie or something. So in the middle of the night, you'd hear bum, 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 back and forth. And it was cold.
There were some cold nights in that
I'd
cabin.
put my denture in a glass of water and get up in the morning and it'd be a piece of ice, you know. We were cooking steaks one night without much light. It was just Bob and I. And I said, well, I'll get a flashlight. We'd been stoking the fire and the steaks were just covered with ashes. And he said, better turn the light off. We ate them anyway.
And the other story is, well, I can't remember his name, but they had the opposite. You had a gourmet cook, and I don't think he really liked to hunt.
They love to cook.
But he cooked chicken breasts and champagne, and they'd have fresh deer steaks and mushrooms, and he was quite a gourmet cook. Bob Dalloway, on the other hand, one year brought up a case of canned SpaghettiOs.
And that was it.
And that was his contribution to the cooking.
But I can remember some of the meals, like venison liver. He'd cut it very thin and sort of saute it with onions, and he'd serve a soup that was cold and a salad that was hot. He was a real cook. And that really started the deer hunting, you know, for us and the family and you and I, and for a long time.
And do you remember there was a limestone cliff?
Yep.
And we'd spend hours looking for fossils.
And they were
there.
just filled with fossils.
You could, just chip away and find fossil after fossil. It was fascinating.
And we should probably wrap this up because I've got to cook the chicken. But we should start next time. We'll finish up with San Antonio. Talk a little bit about Korea.
And, well, let me think. Korea was next. No. Korea was next, and then IG team, and
Korea, IG,
and out. Yep.
Civilian service.
Because I think we had 4 years at the academy, a year in Korea, and 2.5 years on the IG team.
And then Mom's career at some point moved from Bernie to the city.
To the San Antonio Public Library.
So that's kind of where we'll pick up.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Sounds
Very good.
All right. Outstanding. We are done.